Pulse Peeps! What's up? Hey, we're super glad to have you joining us via Instagram Live. And we had our YouTube Live going just a moment ago, and then for whatever reason, it decided that it wasn't going to work. It said it had like 3 viewers, but no video was coming through. So we just axed it for the evening. Luckily, we still got Instagram Live. So how are you doing? Does it work that way?
Oh, it doesn't. Let your friends know that it's on Instagram, guys. Have them jump on over.
Also, so let us know, Brad, do you have your cellular device? Go ahead and pull it out and turn live on. We got a couple people who are going to be watching the comments, so you have an opportunity to interact with us a little bit as well through the teaching. So I want to encourage you as we're dialoguing and as we're chatting about our message to also add your own comments. So you can interact, you can say hi. Let us know you're watching. You can throw the hearts up there and just simply interact with us throughout the gathering. If you have a question, and maybe it's something that's pertinent, Brad's going to try to keep his eye on it a little bit. And if there's a question there, maybe we can get an opportunity to answer a little bit of that right here, right now. You're laughing.
A lot of people saying it's my dad, and then Amber
It's our dad!
It's not my dad.
That's so hilarious. Thank you, Amber. So here's what we're going to do tonight. It's a little bit different, and we're trying something a little bit new. So we are going to do a teaching, a little bit interactive. We're just going to dialogue together, and then after that, don't go anywhere, because I know some of you are doing little watch parties at your house or at a friend's place. We're going to give you an opportunity to kind of dialogue as a group there. But then a couple other leaders are going to jump in, and we're going to kind of do a small group format via Instagram Live. They're going to continue to ask a few questions, dialogue about that. And I want to encourage you afterwards to also have some conversation with whoever you're watching with or some friends. So now is a good time to encourage people to share this, right?
Would that be right now?
I think it's right now.
Yeah,
right now.
Absolutely.
So if you have friends, if you have friends, which you do, or followers, which you do, feel free to share the link to this with them as well, because you never know who might be impacted by that.
Friends.
So as we're diving in, I want to encourage you guys to comment with this as well, because I'd love to hear some stories. But I had a question for you guys. When you were younger, did you and your friends ever make up stories together? Did you ever make up stories?
Absolutely.
From
being kids to now, like actually on our way up to the mountain, we went snowboarding last weekend, and that's literally what we did the whole way up. Just I would say something, and then Colin would jump in, and then Nichols, and then Nathan. Yeah, absolutely.
Colin?
Yeah, we definitely made up stories. I wasn't back in our time. we did.
My back just hurt. Just like age, just like.
There's this thing called going outside and playing.
No.
It was that was kind of like prime time story.
Here come the OK Boom.
You can do that on Minecraft too. You can go outside, run around, enjoy the trees, swim in the water.
I can't think of any specific examples, but yeah, we definitely made up stories on just to keep ourselves entertained. Stuff. Yeah. One time some of you know this, but I used to pray that I would get Spider-Man powers.
Oh, yeah. Me too.
And then me and my friends would like try to climb up walls together, and then we would fall and hurt ourselves.
I always wanted a spider to bite me, but I was also too scared.
Yeah.
I made up stories as well. My cousin and I were huge storytellers, and also I was an only child, and so for the only children out there, we find great ways to keep ourselves entertained. And so whether it was pretending to be a pirate or pretending to traverse planets, I oftentimes was a soldier or I was an NBA player. Today I cannot shoot. It looks good, but it never goes in. But yeah, we made stories up all the time, and my cousin and I used to spend the night over there all the time, and we would actually go to bed and we would just make up stories. Like with this one time, we started telling this story because we really wanted to write not like a book, right? Everyone has this dream of like, I'm gonna write a book, and then you start writing, and you're like, this is hard. I'm gonna, I'm not gonna write the book. Yeah. But when we'd go to bed, we would lay in the dark, and like I would tell a portion of the story, and then he would tell a portion of the story, and then I would tell a portion of the story, and then he would tell a portion of the story, and then I would wake up in the morning and realize that I fall asleep in the middle of our telling stories. But I hope there's some likes or some thumbs up going in the comments to let us know you did the very same thing. I'm getting a nod yes. Here's my question for all of us. If you're watching with someone, feel free to shout it out wherever you're at too. What makes a good story? What are the qualities of a great story? What comes to your mind?
I think of, from coming from the bottom and then reaching a certain level of maybe success or different. Maybe you started, a rags to riches story, where you started with, no money or single parent household, and then now you own and run like an enterprise, something like that.
It's the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, if you think about like a book, if you had the first page of a book and the last page of a book, there would be no story to the book, right? So it's all the in between. It's all the chapters in between the book that make the story really, really good. So I would say definitely the journey and how the story comes to fruition. Not necessarily the end of the story that makes the story the best, but what happens in the story, even things that haven't happened yet.
Yeah, we're getting comments like conflict, mystery,
conflict.
the impact,
Mystery. That's
all
awesome.
really, really good points.
Impact.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome. I think of in the midst of that, we can kind of see the ups and downs. Part of my photography brain kicks in, and I want to say contrast, but it's the contrast of like light and dark, or like good and bad, or things are going bad and then they start going good.
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings.
Don't you dare drop.
Let's just put that there. Lord of the Rings, right? It's there's multiple stories there, but there's these journeys of positivity and challenge of relationship and conflict. Sometimes you don't know what's going to happen, but you're on the edge of your seat the whole time. So we're in this series called Choose Your Own Adventure, and we've been talking about this idea that following Jesus really isn't formulaic, right? It's not a formula, it's more like an adventure. You may say it's kind of like an adventure story, that following Jesus isn't just this black and white, step 1, step 2, steps 3, step 4 kind of process, but it's actually an adventure, and I think that's so cool. We talked about this a little bit yesterday even, and you were talking to me, Brad, a little bit about just why that is so exciting to you or interesting in regards to how you've even jumped in.
Faith. I would say that anyone who believes that following Jesus is this like formulaic structural thing that you have to get this done before you do that. With my story, I was saved, and then I made this declaration. It's like, Jesus, if I feel like it's from you, then I'm gonna jump into it. And so that brought me from just being saved into being planted at a church, which is where I found my home here, which is jumping into youth group and meeting all of you people. And
you just jumped right in, brand new,
deep dive.
Yeah, and that's that. It was a quick transition, but it just came out of saying yes.
Or mission trips.
Yeah, well,
right?
Can't joke. Yeah, first time on a plane.
Out of nowhere, first trip on a plane is a 13-hour flight to Vanuatu, which
that was your first trip on a plane?
Yeah.
Wow.
Right? So like, how many people even go to Vanuatu at all? And that's your first. Where that is, what that is. It sounds like a dish.
Yeah, and that came out of my. It was my first meeting with Sean, and he's just like, I brought up his backpack and how cool it was. He's like, yeah, we do a lot of traveling. Anyway, Vanuatu. And I was like, yeah. And it was easy to say yes, because it's like, does it make much of Jesus?
Yeah, and it doesn't make sense, because if it was a formula, you did everything out of order.
Yeah,
right?
way out of order.
But a lot of people think that. It's a formula, or like, I would say my perception is people that I know that aren't followers of Jesus, that's the perception. That it's just this really cut and dry, black and white, kind of stale, boring experience. But Colin, you were even saying, one of the things you love is the fact that our stories are all different.
Yeah.
I don't know if you had anything else to say on that.
Yeah, I think that kind of proves that our stories, following Jesus can't be a formula, because no one can come in here and tell me that I'm not following Jesus because I'm not doing it the way that you are, and you're not following Jesus because you're not doing it the way that I am doing it.
Right.
So a formula just can't exist, because we could be following Jesus at the same level and intensity or whatever, however you want to call that, but we got here in completely different ways. That's what I would say about that.
Well, and I think that's to me, these are the things that make me really excited to be a follower of Jesus, because we're all so different. We're all so unique. Even just sitting right here between the three of us, we have different personalities.
Absolutely.
There are times where that overlaps and it gets crazy,
right? A little bit.
But in so many ways, we're different. We have different personalities. We have different interests. We see the world differently. We come from different places in our journey of following Jesus. And I just love that for all of us, those watching right now and listening, you come from a different place than I am, and yet we can all follow Jesus. We all serve God, and that's part of this adventure that we're all on. And the one thing that I was thinking about, as we were diving into this, is the fact that all of our stories are unique. We all come from different places, but they're all stories of transformation.
Yeah.
That's the one thing that we have in common as followers of Jesus, is that all of our stories are a story of transformation. And for some, it may be really dramatic. For some of us, it's not, well, I hope it's not complete yet, right? We're still in process. And that's kind of the idea here today is, as we're following Jesus, this is the part I just get excited about, is this is an adventure, and it's an adventure of transformation, and we're not done. Because since Jesus is the end goal, since he is our final destination, and since we can look to him to discern the promises of our lives and what he has in store for us, I know that I'm not perfect yet. I know that I'm still in the process of being made like Jesus, and I just think it's so cool that all of us, in some way, as we look back on our lives, we can say, yeah, there's been a transformation. And I even sometimes, if I get discouraged nowadays, it's oftentimes because I forget about how far I've come, how far God has brought me. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's so easy to forget, especially like with my, how rapid mine was. It was so easy to just forget what God has done. It's easy to step out of that and be like, oh, but something bad just happened. And we forget those but God moments.
Yeah.
And that's why we need to, we need to have ways in which we remember and we celebrate that, and we can look back on the times when when maybe it's a little bit harder.
Yeah.
So
this idea of transformation, that's what I want us to kind of look at, is we are in the process of transformation. God is a God of transformation, and our stories aren't complete, but we also have the opportunity to tell our stories wherever we're at right now. You have a story to tell. You have a story to tell. And
you have a story to tell.
I know every time I say that, there are people who go, not me, I don't, but we do. Wherever you're at, you have a story to tell. And, I think of the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul has a wild story. His story is radical. He goes from being a strong Pharisee, following the Jewish law and the code. He's self-described as a religious zealot, and he finds himself as an enemy of the church, persecuting the church. And then from persecuting the church, he's walking on the road to Damascus, and Jesus, the resurrected Jesus, appears before him and blinds him with his glory. And Paul then is forced to go and wait for this guy to come and bring healing to him, and then he becomes a follower of Jesus, and then that same zeal, he becomes this passionate crusader for the gospel, and he goes around and he literally ends up planting churches. He gets bitten by a snake that should absolutely kill him. It doesn't happen. He gets like killed and comes back to life, basically. Let's just skip over that. That's nothing. That's another one, right? He plants churches all across the known world at the time, and then going forward, he experiences this crazy shipwreck that really should have killed everyone. And yeah, right? Which shipwreck? Which there's times he gets like lowered out of a basket outside of city walls to escape. Like, dude's living a 007 movie, or Mission Impossible, or I just thought of why can't I forget it? Bourne. Yeah, like, he's literally like, this is first century Bourne. Bourne. But so that's a Born again. Yes. Like, hashtag born again.
Hashtag born again in the comments.
Someone please.
The story of Paul.
Make a movie poster called Born Again.
Oh my gosh. The Apostle Paul, like on a sinking ship, born again.
Born again.
Wow. This is, I think, the trademark.
Do they know
trademark?
Yeah. Hey.
Hopefully.
Don't distribute yet.
If you don't know Born,
this
hurts
me.
me.
To connect.
But so he this is a wild story, and I don't have Paul's story. My story doesn't feel as crazy, yet at the same time I know that all of us in some way have or will experience some shipwrecks in life. We will experience some things if we haven't already, and so maybe we can even find a little bit of our story in Paul's story, which right now I'm even thinking we can find ourselves in Paul's story. Paul's story is part of the gospel story, and the gospel story is God's story. It's his story, which is our history. And we can find our place in a story that is so much bigger than us. But there's a story in Mark chapter 5, verses 1 through 2. It's a story about this demoniac. It's a man full of demons. The word that they're going to use in the scripture is legion. So if you have a Bible near you, I'd encourage you to flip to Mark chapter 5, verse 1 through 20 right now. We're going to read it out of the New Living Translation. But this is a really interesting story, and there's just something that I want to touch on at the end of it. But Brad, would you read it? Read it with emphasis. Read it
with zeal.
Read it like it's the Lord of the Rings.
It would be.
Although don't do like Hobbit voices and stuff.
It'd be my honor and privilege to read this. All right. So they arrived at the other side of the lake in the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus climbed out of the boat, a man possessed by an evil spirit came out from the cemetery to meet him. This man lived among the burial graves and could no longer be restrained, even with a chain. Whenever he was put into chains and shackles, as often as he would snap the chains and shackles. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Day and night he wandered among the burial caves and in the hills, howling and cutting himself with sharp stones. While Jesus was still some distance away, the man saw him, ran to meet him, and bowed low before him. With a shriek he screamed, "Why are you interfering with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In the name of God, I beg you, don't torture me." For Jesus had already said to the spirit, "Come out of the man, you evil spirit." Then Jesus demanded, "What is your name?" And he replied, "My name is Legion, because there are many of us inside the man." Then the evil spirits begged him again and again not to send them into a distant place. There happened to be a large herd of pigs feeding on the hillside nearby. "Send us into those pigs," the spirits begged. "Let us enter them." So Jesus gave them permission. The evil spirits came out of the man and entered the pigs, and the entire herd, about 2,000, plunged down into the steep hillside into the lake and drowned in the water. The herdsmen fled to the nearby town and surrounding countryside, spreading the news as they can. People rushed out to see what had happened. A crowd soon gathered around Jesus, and they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons. He was sitting there fully clothed and perfectly sane, and they were all afraid. Then those who had seen what happened told the others about the demon-possessed man and the pigs, and the crowd began pleading with Jesus to go away and leave them alone. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with them. But Jesus said, "No, go home to your family and tell them everything the Lord has done for you and how merciful he has been." So the man started off to visit the 10 towns of that region and began to proclaim the great things Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed at what he told them.
So I'll ask you what jumps out to you in just a second, so I'll give you a second to think about that. But I love that the Bible just demonstrates the power of a story. The power of a story. This is, well, to one man, this would have been a very personal story. We see it as a really profound Bible story. We reference it a lot of times. It's a powerful story.
Yeah.
But the Bible's full of stories of, right? We talked about a little what makes for an interesting story. Stories of underdogs, stories of redemption, stories of death and life or transformation, and stories of the miraculous. And this is a crazy story. Is there anything that just jumps out to you immediately when you look at the story? There's a lot here. And you're welcome to comment as well about what kind of things jump out to you.
Absolutely.
I think for me was the fact that the demons asked permission to be put into the pigs. Like, they recognize that Jesus is mighty and that he's king. So even the demons recognize that, which I think is just so awesome. But that's like, for me, that tells me I'm a Christian. I know that Jesus is with me. I know that the Spirit is with me at all times. So I have nothing to fear. I should have no fear for demons or the enemy to interfere in my life because I have Jesus with me at all times. And if they recognize that Jesus is king and they even bow down to him, what am I fearing?
Yeah, and that's prefaced with nothing could contain it. That's prefaced with he broke out of every shackle they put on it.
Chains.
And yet he ran up to Jesus, bowed at his feet, and said, "Please." Like what does that say about your God? The God that you serve, you know?
No, that's huge.
I think another one, if I can, another one was when the man begged to go with him, and Jesus said, "No, go tell everyone." That's a big one, because what we see in the Gospels is Jesus usually says, "Don't say anything." Yeah. Because my time, you know, and then Luke or Mark, one of them will say, "My time has not yet come." Because his time had not yet come. So that one just jumps right off the pages.
Yeah, I think that part of the story is really interesting. The fact that this man was cutting himself, unable to even control himself because of these legions, which had been, like, numerically is about 2,000 legions of demons influencing him, and what it would feel like to be trapped in that space, I can't even imagine. And then he encounters Jesus and he's freed, and immediately he wants to follow. Yeah. Which I think I would too. Yeah. Experiencing the power of God would make me want to stay near him. And yet Jesus says, and this is prefaced again with the context a little earlier in the chapter. He was just basically think the town of the Hebrews, and think the town of the Gentiles. Yeah. And Jesus was just with the Jewish people, and he left them, goes across the sea, and he lands in this town where there aren't really any Jews. It's a Gentile town, so this man is a Gentile. And this is before Jesus really started doing his ministry to the Gentiles, and yet he frees this man, and people are so in shock and don't know who this is, and they're actually scared that they tell him to go back. Yeah. Like, go back over the water.
They're like, this is weird.
And so a principle we might take away is the fact that Jesus won't force himself into your life either. Yeah. I wasn't planning on saying that, but Jesus comes to this town, they tell him to leave, and he gets back on the boat and heads back over. And as he's heading back over, this man wants to go with him, and he says, "No, stay here." And I have that underlined in my Bible. It says in verse 19, he did not permit him, but said, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done from you and how he has had mercy on you." Yeah. And I think we should hear those words to ourselves. Yeah. Go and tell the people of how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. And the man does it. He goes away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis, which is 10 basically cities that are combined together. And historically speaking, the Decapolis became a very very religious community, and a lot of scholars trace it back to this man was really the first one to go and tell in this area.
Yeah.
Which is huge to think about the impact of his personal story.
The transformation.
And we have a personal story. So, real quick, I want to encourage people to comment as well. Do you have a story? Does anything come to mind about how Jesus has maybe transformed you?
Absolutely. I mean, everything, where I was going and where my life was headed, I was pursuing law enforcement. I was doing things that I shouldn't have been doing. Besides that, and then God just broke my heart. That He changed me, and He's still continuing to change me. But when it comes to my story, it was like there was molten fire in my stomach, and I just had to tell people. I had to tell people what He had done for me. That's not that I have everything right or everything figured out,
right,
but just that, man, look what Jesus did to me. And that comes from my experience. That none of that was gospel knowledge. Yeah. None of that was, and I think that's what reflects the gospel itself. Is it's that good news of Jesus, not advice or, hey, I see you're going through something. Read this scripture. Instead, it's what Jesus did in your life is the gospel.
It's cool, man.
For
Colin,
me,
yeah, and you have a slightly different background too. Just because you grew up in a Christian home, and kind of were in church in some way for most of your life, right? So,
yeah, for me, I was saved when I was like 6 years old. That's when I gave my heart to the Lord.
Awesome.
And I've actually struggled with this a lot. Thinking like a lot of portions of my life I've struggled with the idea I grew up in a Christian home, I've been doing this my entire life. My story doesn't really mean anything, and my testimony isn't really a good testimony. I don't have a good testimony. Why would anybody want me to speak ever? Because it's just cut and paste testimony. But for me, the way I see the transformation within that is, because I grew up in a Christian home, I didn't really get to learn how to follow Jesus for myself. I learned how to follow Jesus the way that my parents followed Jesus. And for me, that was kind of it really didn't shift until 8th or 9th grade when I realized that I needed to, and my parents were good about helping me with this. I needed to take it upon myself to seek after that faith for myself. It'd be my own faith in Jesus and whether or not I actually wanted to follow this or not. And I think that's probably one of the biggest transformations of my life with that situation, is recognizing that it's no longer a family faith, and it is a family faith, but it's more of my own personal walk with Christ than just doing it because my parents took me to church every Sunday.
Absolutely. And if I can interject, there's something so good about, because I feel like, in not to compare, but if I would, because of my heart and who I am, I feel like if I grew up in that, claiming it for myself would be so difficult. And I think that speaks truth to who you are as a person, in your character, in your walk, to lay that claim, to stake that in the ground and say, this is mine now. Yeah, there's so much goodness that can come out of that.
Well, it makes sense. I didn't grow up in a Christian home. I became a follower around 17-ish years old. And so, yeah, if you were someone who's grown up in a Christian home, or maybe, you gave your life to Jesus at an early age, I could see how there could be a struggle of maybe you don't know what it's like to live apart from God so much, fresh in your memory, that I could even see struggling to wonder if transformation was happening, or if it's real, or if it's taking place, or if God really is who He says He is, just because you've known Him your whole life. And I've talked to people who've said that, I read my Bible and I go to church, and I've been doing that since I was born. And so it's just they can miss their own story, kind of like you said. And I would add just, as someone, I've known you since you were a junior or senior in high school, and Emily, and I've definitely I've noticed both of you grow.
Yeah.
And I'm specifically you, being that you've grown up in a Christian home. It makes when you might have given your life to Jesus, but you continue to grow more devoted.
Yeah.
You continue to grow in your devotion to Jesus and in giving more and more of your life to Jesus, which has altered your path from teaching, pursuit of teaching, to a pursuit of ministry, which has led to even opening doors for the possibility of pastoring somewhere or launching a church campus somewhere. And I know those were not things that you initially had on your radar, or probably were not part of the plan.
Nope.
Either. And I just think that shows growing devotion, which is transformation.
Yeah.
Yep.
So even if you've known Jesus your whole life, you can go from faith to steadfast devotion, and that continues to increase. And in my own life, I'm serving God in ministry, but I continue to find aspects of my life that need to be committed to Him, or that I can continue to grow in devotion. I continue to wrestle with surrender in my own life in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So, that's really good. Here's a question. We're gonna dialogue about it a little bit more. I don't think we need to put it up yet, but what I want to encourage people with is the fact that we need to tell our stories. Like the demoniac, or this man from the story, he didn't know Jesus for that long. He didn't have all the faith answers. He didn't have everything figured out. He didn't know all the theological things. I wonder, while I was looking at the story, did he know who Jesus was? Did he know that he was God? Did he hear that as the demons spoke it from him? I just don't even know what the interaction with Jesus was. I just know that he wanted more of him.
Yeah.
So he didn't have all the answers, but Jesus says, go and tell everyone of what has been done for you, what the Lord has done for you, and he does it. And there's just a couple principles I want us to take away as a group, and that's the fact that we need to tell our stories. There is a graphic in here of something I'm going to post to the Instagram story about kind of discerning your own story. And I have it broken up into two different parts. And it'll be more like a half sheet of paper in dimensions, but it's an opportunity for you to look at your own story and figure out where you are in your journey with Jesus. The top basically says, I decided to follow Jesus when I was blank years old. And then a because. For me, it was 17 years old, and I could tell you my because. My because was really because I felt like there was a person I was supposed to be or I wanted to be, and I was constantly falling short, and I couldn't make it, and I tried and tried and tried to do that on my own, and with continuous failures and missing that result. And I just called out to God, and I said, I need something different. And if you're real, I need you. And that's my because. But maybe you're not a follower of Jesus right now. But you're interested in knowing more about him. Because why? Because why? There's a couple other questions. A way that Jesus has transformed me is, or if I could ask Jesus to transform one thing about me, I would want him to, blank. This is on the sheet. If you want to go to the next one, you should be able to see it on the screen. I'm not going to read through all of it. Oh, well, there's the top. My name is, and fill is out. This tool is an opportunity to help you kind of work through your story. Yeah. As a means of, if you figure out which one you want to fill out, that's a template for you to begin telling your story to others and figure out where you are in your faith journey. But we need to tell our journey for a couple of reasons. One is because there's someone who needs to hear it. I know that whether you feel like you have a story or not, we all started in a different place. Yeah. We all have different backgrounds and different experiences. And I know that there are people who need to hear your story. Yeah. There are people that need to hear the story of me growing up in a non-Christian home. There are people who need to hear the story of radical transformation. The people who say, "Oh man, I went to bed, or I went to bed drunk and I prayed and I woke up completely sober and I gave my life to Jesus right then and never went back." Mm-hmm. People need to hear that story if that's yours. But there's also people who need to hear the story that, man, you followed Jesus your whole life. Yeah. And maybe you had a healthy family and things were good the whole time. Why? You know why that's important? Because that's God's desire for everyone. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes people just need to know that that's a possibility in their life. Yeah. Secondly, you need to share your story because it makes things clearer. And part of sharing our story is that, have you ever noticed that if you write something down, or you start talking about it, you start to see the pieces? And telling your story not only is important for sharing it with other people, but it'll help you grow in your own relationship with God, to recognize the ways that he's impacted your life. Sharing your story clarifies the ways that God's been present. Yeah. Sharing your story also makes you grateful. Have you ever written a letter or a thank you note, or been mid-sentence talking about a friend of yours, and suddenly you just realize how grateful you are for them?
Yeah.
You know what? Wow, they've been there for me a lot. I didn't even think about it. I need to tell them. When you think about your story and you tell your story of your relationship with Jesus, it'll produce a gratitude in your own heart to see that he's been present. And sharing your own story, well, it makes you brave, because it's a little scary sometimes to tell our own story. And I want to challenge us with that. Lastly, sharing your story makes you grow. Some people think sharing their story is what you do if you've grown in your faith, or you've gotten to whatever that arrival point is. We already said it's an adventure and we're not quite there, but maybe I'll tell my story when I get it all worked out and figured out. But I would just say, sharing our story helps us grow. And like the man in the story we read in the book of Mark, it'll grow our faith. It'll help us become aware of God in all of these ways. And that's just the takeaway for us. If there was one thing I could challenge us with, it would just to encourage us to remember that our story's not over. It's still being written. That's encouraging, because God is still in the process of renewing us and transforming us and doing a new work. That word transformation is just, I think, the story of our lives. Yeah. And I want to encourage us to share our story, with others as a means of both growing in our own faith, but also impacting other people. Yeah. So any last words as we wrap up this portion?
I wanted to throw a comment that just stuck out. So Sam says, your story and what Christ did for you can't be debated. Mm-hmm. What's that mean?
I think what she's getting at is the fact that when we're talking to people about God, sometimes we have a tendency to try to engage in the theological discussions. Yeah. Sometimes we get trapped into it because someone asks a question and we try to give the answer. Sometimes my answers suck on that realm because I'm trying to talk about things that I don't know. Absolutely. When the demoniac, full of 2,000 demons, sat at the feet of Jesus in his right mind and walked into town and said, "Hey, everybody," they would have been blown away. Yeah. What happened to you? Yeah. And he said, "Oh, let me tell you my story. Let me tell you what the Lord's done for me." Yeah. And whether you've got the right theological answers or not, whether he would have, the fact that he was in his right mind would have spoken for itself. Yeah. No one could have debated that.
That's so good. I mean, and what does that say about us and our story? Does that mean we have to have it all figured out? Like, does that mean we have to? I mean, because reading the Bible, that's a great thing. Yeah. I'd say do it every day. Yeah. But does God give grace and fill gaps maybe where you don't know everything?
Yeah. Yeah, and here's the one thing I know is I've gotten in a lot of discussions with a lot of people about faith, and at the end of the day, sometimes we're not going to land on the same page. Mm-hmm. But sometimes I'll just simply end a conversation with, all I know is this is what God has done for me, and I know that I didn't do it myself, and I can't take credit for it. Yeah. And at the end of the day, I can put the light back on Jesus with that, knowing that the transformation I've experienced in my story isn't my own, but it's from God. So hopefully that's encouraging to everyone. Don't sign off, because we got a couple leaders who are going to jump in to have a little bit more, to dialogue about some questions here together. But here's what I want to do. As we jump out, I want you to look at this question on the screen. Why do you think it's so helpful to hear other people's story of faith? You can start it, Colin. You got 1 minute. If you're watching with someone, dialogue about it with your group right now. If you're on your own, comment in the comment section below. But take a minute. Thanks for joining us. We got a little bit more in store for you. Woo!
Kira, why do you think it's helpful to hear other people's stories of faith?
I think because when we hear other people open up about what they've been through in their life, it makes me more comfortable in sharing my own story and being inspired, like, man, if they maybe at one point felt like they weren't good enough, or they felt like they were going through a really hard time in their life and they couldn't share, but they're sharing it with me, it makes me feel like, oh, maybe I can do the same in sharing my story. And so it helps me become more vulnerable as well.
I always know that vulnerability always like introduces and like encourages vulnerability in the other way. Like you open up about something that like happened a long time ago. Like we had someone in the comments talk about her story and how she wanted to commit suicide when she was younger, and then like God totally like overcame that, and how like, you know, telling that you don't know what someone's struggling with too, and if they struggle with the same thing, like, oh, you didn't, and this is what God did for you. Like it's crazy to think of, you know, what could happen. Because sometimes you're just so low that you're like, I can't even think that far. You only see like right here when really God's like a mile away and stuff. So yeah. What do you think, Colin? Why is it important?
Yeah, I think it's super important to share our stories because, and this kind of goes back to what we talked about, is that like all of our stories are so unique, so different. We're like a bunch of snowflakes, you know, not in a bad wimpy way, but snowflakes are every single snowflake that falls is completely different. There's not one single snowflake that is exactly the same as the next one. Right. And if you're fearing that, like if you have fear of talking to people about your story, you don't really know, you can't judge what God's going to use that for. Right. There could be someone who you come in contact with and talk with that might be exactly what they've needed to hear. You know, they might be going through something that you have no idea what it is, but just because you shared your story and that there's hope in your story, then that could help someone. And honestly, it could cause a ripple effect too, because then it encourages them to share their story, and then it encourages those people to share their story, and then just kind of exponentially helps.
Yeah. So another question, how easy is it for you to share your story right now? And I know that we've all been following Jesus just a little bit longer, but how is it even now to share your story with other people?
I'm not gonna lie, sometimes it's still hard depending on the person and who it is. A lot of the friends I was in high school with aren't followers of Jesus, and they've known me for a long time. Yeah. So it's kind of hard to share with them sometimes about the transformation I've been through, even though they have seen some difference, but they know I've grown up in church, so they kind of don't want to hear it. But so it can be difficult, but I don't want to let that ever stop me, and I really ask God to help me in these conversations to truly show you in the authenticity of it. But it can be really difficult. I don't know about you, Colin, but growing up in the church, sometimes there's this worry about other people just writing you off as a Christian and not wanting to hear anything more.
Absolutely. I think especially it's really, even right now, like it's, and I experienced it more in like high school, but I think it was really hard for me having friends that knew that I grew up in a Christian household, because they did write me off as, you know, oh, you're just the Christian guy, you know, it's good that you're living a good lifestyle, but you know, it doesn't really mean much. So it can be really difficult to share or try to share my story with people who kind of give me a pre-judgment on like its usefulness, I guess, if that makes sense. And then like in high school, just people just knew that I was a Christian, so it wasn't necessarily anything new to them, and I think that's what made it difficult.
Well, it's just like Jesus couldn't share or like talk to people in his own town, and how hard it is sometimes when we're so close to people in proximity, and like how hard it is to actually like communicate with them. Of like it's easier to tell a stranger and be like, oh, the Lord did this for me, you'll never see me again, and cool, bye. Like, and like that is a seed, but like the relationships that you can create and then mold and just continue to nurture, those ones can be more meaningful in ways because you get to be able to walk with them day in and day out. And in high school, the same thing for me. Like, I didn't even start following Jesus until I was 15, so I was a freshman, sophomore in high school, and like there was people that found out quickly because like I was like, all right, Jesus, like I'm in, like all in, let's do it. And like, and I probably burned some bridges in the process of that because I was so strong in like what I believed. But in how it could influence like friends that I would just focus on a relationship or two at a time to really like nurture before I even was like, hey, so the Lord did this in my life, but it can take time, but it can be really hard to be like, oh, hey, you know, Jesus, like, have you heard of him? Do you know who he is? What he did for me? Like, yeah.
That's why sharing a story is so comforting, and you can have confidence in it because it's your experience and what you've been through and what God has done in your life. So no matter how people respond, you can know like this is a transformation that's happened in my life, and people can't necessarily debate that. They can't say no, that didn't happen in your story. It's like, well,
but it did.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it does. Going into it, even though you can have nerves of like wondering what they're gonna think and how they're gonna accept it, but just coming back to like, man, but I'm confident in how God has transformed me and my story. And so no matter what happens through the conversation, just having confidence in that and just praying that God would use that in the person's life, hopefully.
Yeah, and I think at some point that'll start to become effective. I think another difficulty as someone who grew up in a Christian home is some people might the transformation that has happened in my life might not be as relatable to other people. Like I didn't get radically saved from like drug abuse. You know what I mean? So they might think, well, you don't know what I'm going through. So like that's great for you. You don't know what I'm going through. But my advice there would be like, just because someone might write you off in that moment, don't stop being Jesus to them. Because at some point in their life, I really truly believe that something will happen in their life to where they see you as an example, and then they start to think, well, there might be something to this. And then, that could start to snowball a little bit.
Yeah, and something, as you were talking, I just thought about is, even if we don't necessarily go through stories that other people, I think there's still a root issue or root heart issue that we can relate on a certain level, that maybe in a situation where we are looking to other things for security. Some people that has been drugs, but maybe for other people it might be social media or some other person, We might not be able to relate with our stories necessarily, but there might still be a heart issue or just something that's going on in your life or in your heart or in your mind that you're able to connect with on some point, and talking about how Jesus transformed that part of your life.
Yeah. That's good. Is there what are some examples of ways we can overcome the obstacles that come when we're afraid to tell someone about Jesus? Like ways we could struggle with it, like how do we overcome, if it's you're shy, those kind of examples of you're close to someone, that can be hard, but how do we overcome that?
I'm curious what you guys think too. So
yeah, please help us.
This is literally a virtual small group. So comment, guys. Let us know your answers to these questions too as we're thinking. Are there any answers to any of the ones that we've gone through so far? You should
come on over here, Brad.
Brad is
just come over here.
Stand next to Emily. Okay, here we go. There's been a lot of comments. Shout out Pastor Mark in the house.
Ooh, hey, Pastor.
Yeah, just a lot of just testimonies about people sharing their story. Zoe says, I feel like your story is the bridge between God and having a relationship with Him. Without the connection, we seem like people chasing after something out of reach.
That's really fun. That's awesome.
It's very deep. And then something Samantha said, sometimes fear and the fear of judgment gets in the way of sharing your story, and when that happens, it's not just your story being scared away, it's God's testimony through you.
Yeah.
So I think that could tie to the question that you just asked. Fear being the reason why you don't tell your story. Here's the thing, guys, is there's this awesome thing called the Holy Spirit. It's really, really, really difficult to feel it when you're not pursuing it. So I could have a fear of talking to somebody about my story, But until I actually approach them, I'm going to continue to have that fear.
Yeah.
And then the thing that happens though is that when I do end up approaching that person, I truly feel God's presence in His Spirit with me, helping me to know the words to say, helping me to understand. It's kind of crazy sometimes how it can happen, where I will literally walk up to somebody, have no idea what I'm going to say to them, and then all of a sudden words just come out of my mouth, and that's just awesome. So I think the way to overcome that fear could be just relying and abiding in the Spirit, and understanding that even though our humanly fear might keep us from talking to them, the power of the Spirit transgresses that and overcomes.
Yeah, well, we got a word from Rachel here. Or Ray underscore 3.
That's Whitney.
Whitney.
That's
sorry.
Whitney.
Oh, you're Whitney. Ray. It's just that. I feel like being vulnerable is tough. Like, it was hard for me to tell my secret. Like, it's just tough because I thought people were going to hate me if they knew my secret, but then they didn't, and I was like, wow.
I love that one.
That's good, but
And we can with anything, yeah.
I think you'd be surprised how people would react. I think it's really important not to kind of like prejudge how people are going to react to it either, because then that could also just be yourself keeping you from,
Or the enemy is trying
or
to
the
attack
enemy
you.
interceding and trying and keeping you from doing that.
Yeah.
So
Well, see, this is interesting. It's something I think we should talk about more. I know I'm off camera, but, Kenzie was saying that she was scared to share her story, or to share about God to friends because she thought that they would make fun of her and wouldn't be her friend. And now she's saying she realizes that shouldn't let it stop her. And it still kind of stops me sometimes. So I just, what are your thoughts?
I mean, that was me for a long time, like in high school, because I started high school and I left high school with the entire opposite of like friend group. Partially because like high school does that, and partially because like my decisions of like following Jesus really were like a straight line of like what I did and like how I talked to people. And so like, oh man, I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. What was she saying about?
Don't let the fear keep
Oh,
you from
yeah.
doing it.
Oh yeah, because like I mean, there will be people that will not be your friend after, and like that has to be okay. But like, is Jesus worth it? Like, if you keeping your friends is more important, then that's obviously what's more important than like following Jesus, because He calls us to tell our friends and tell those around us about Him. So
Yeah.
I would add to a thought, even with that, is the point to be liked by everyone or to see people come to know Jesus?
Yeah.
The higher priority of seeing people come to know Jesus is going to nudge me beyond my fear of not being liked anymore, because that's not what it's all about. If I go through this life and every single person thinks I was the coolest guy on earth, and they all spend eternity apart from God because I never told them, that was the wrong focus. And that one gets to me, is, you know what, someone might not like me because I say this, but on the other side, they might receive this with glad hearts. And I at least need to give them the opportunity.
The other thing too is you might have a really close friend that ends up not being your friend anymore after you talk to them. But the thing is, you planted that seed, and maybe like a year down the road, you guys aren't even talking anymore, but something happens in their life, and they realize, Kenzie talked to me a year ago about this thing called Christianity and following Jesus, and I'm really going through something really hard right now. Maybe I should try this out. So like, you have no idea what the power of your story could do in talking to people about the gospel, even if that means losing friends. And I think for me, I'd be fine with having even 0 friends in my entire life if it meant that every single person that I talked to, even if they, defriended me, knew about Jesus. Because that's what's important.
Yeah, let's remind ourselves that Jesus died because he was rejected for trying to tell people about him.
Yeah.
But he did it anyways because people were worth dying for. And people are worth dying for. Jesus already did it for them, and they deserve to know. They deserve to know. Maybe that's the encouragement that we need. So no, that's great conversation, guys. Any final thoughts? Maybe not scripted or not part of our questions.
I think just like one quick little thing. It's something Ashley Silveri, if you guys know who she is, she always says the phrase, "Do it afraid."
Yeah.
And so you will feel fear. That's the truth of it. And just because we feel fear doesn't mean that we shouldn't still share, that we need to be fearless before we go out and share our story or talk to other people about Jesus. But we just step out and we do it afraid. And like Colin mentioned, that the Holy Spirit is with you, and just relying on him and like, God, give me the words to say, and give me the ability to be able to share what you want me to share.
And honestly, like the Bible promises that we're going to be persecuted. You're not going to avoid it.
Yeah.
In some situations you might, but you will never avoid persecution for telling the story of Jesus.
Yeah.
Right.
And because that is guaranteed, that even more causes me to want to tell the story of Jesus, because it's going to happen anyway. So why not do it?
Well, and it's like God never called you to stay in your comfort zone.
The Great Commission was like, go out and get friends.
Go out and get all the friends, get all the likes. It's gonna be awesome.
All the likes, all the subscribers.
Now go.
Yeah.
No, go and tell people. Go and tell people about what I have done for them, and teach them to obey the things that I have commanded you. Right? Teach them to obey these things. That challenges me too, because am I teaching people to obey the things of Jesus? And how do I do that? We're on that journey of discovering that together. But know that Jesus is with us every single day to the end of the age, encouraging us, helping us, guiding us to live that life. So